Welcome to Everybody Hates LA. I'm Francisca, your host. Today we get to learn a lot. I didn't realize that LA also had a huge influence on cars and automobiles and the whole industry.
Yeah, I think other than Detroit, it probably is the number one city in the world for automobiles and cars. It is funny, very few cars have been made here, but there are certain brands that launched here but went out of business or they made a few cars in the area. But even with that, the fact we don't have cars made here, it's a car crazy city that has been built around the car. The car has built the city in many ways. And it's also influenced automotive design, automotive selling, automotive marketing. It's had a huge influence on that, more than I think any other city in the world, possibly other than Detroit.
Well, it's really cool to even see like the custom made cars. Is it smart to have a super expensive car like a Ferrari here? Because the stop and go, that doesn't make it that fun to drive, right?
Well, right, but again, so close to where we are, you have flat desert highways. You have Angeles Crest Highway just out of town. You have the various racetracks, Willow Springs and stuff like that nearby. So I mean, just beautiful drives. I mean,
Yeah.
PCH, all of this. I mean, just
Yeah.
wonderful places to drive. And so it may not make sense here, in central Hollywood to have a car like that. But once you get a little bit out of the area, I mean, you basically want a car like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you're basically being robbed if you're not in. LA just kind of boomed during the 1920s, partly because of the film industry, and just grew very, very quickly. I mean, doubled essentially in the 1920s in population and sprawled very fast because there's a lot of land here in the
Yeah.
basin. Then, of course, the San Fernando Valley. And then even today, it's even stretched out. I mean, basically all of Simi Valley, Santa Clarita, all
Yeah.
that's filling up as it just gets crazier and crazier. And because of that, it happened so fast. I mean, the car was kind of the solution to that.
Yeah.
That was thought of as the best transportation solution. It easily beat the public transportation, the buses, the trolley cars we once had, and that was the best way to do it. I mean, if you wanted to get out of town from your home to downtown, whatever the case is, it was just easier to use a car than it
Yeah.
was trolleys.
Because they're unreliable, right? Or they were
Yeah.
either they didn't get there, they changed this, they went out of business. I think even in the probably late 20s to 30s, and by I think the 50s, they were totally gone.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. The original trolley cars, they're often most people, of course, don't remember them, and they weren't around then. But
Yeah.
they're often kind of romanticized as kind of a cool part of LA's history. But that was the case. I mean, they often broke down. They were very crowded, dirty, that type of thing, and it was basically what people chose. I mean, people just chose the car as the better way to get around. And it was only because of of course, the aqueduct when they built that to allow water to come in, that eventually you had the city growing up and stuff like that. There were cars made in LA, probably as early as the 1890s, of like small mom and pop car makers that just kind of were able to put a gas engine on a horse carriage
Yeah.
and essentially build a car. So some of the museums around here will have that. There's a car, a 1900 Smith, that was made actually down in Compton. That was built at that time. That's basically just a horse carriage with a small gas motor in it, one cylinder that powers it. And so you had a few small automakers, regional automakers here in LA, and of course San Francisco too, that built cars back then. But of course they're long gone now.
That's
And of
crazy
course,
to think about because I feel like you only have those big car makers, right? Like Ford or like Kia, for example, not these small like mom and pop shops that kind of make it happen. But I suppose, I mean, everybody could make a car.
Yeah.
Tesla came out of nothing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Seemingly.
Tesla's unbelievable that's because before Tesla, there basically hadn't been any new car makers for decades.
Yeah.
Because it was so hard to get into. But yeah, in the early days, it was basically a wild west of cars. I mean, anyone who had a carriage and could get an engine
Yeah.
could build a car. And
Yeah.
so there were thousands of car makers just in the U.S. alone, not counting all the ones in Europe and everywhere else
Yeah.
that were just sprung up. Many of them lasted less than a year and
Wow.
quickly went out of business or merged into other companies, that type of thing. So it's just like modern day Ford or GM. I mean, they're made up of a merger of countless other automakers, other people involved in it, and eventually just came to be what we know as today's modern Ford.
You said earlier that cars kind of helped shape the personality of LA. What did you mean by that?
Well, just part of the style of it, the different models that you have. Obviously, you have the great weather, so the convertible became very important in LA. Again, not really invented here, but part of it. But then, of course, you have always, as I just mentioned, the great weather all the time. It just allowed a lot of people to design their own car, kind of show off what they wanted to look at. So a lot of different in the custom industry, customization in cars really grew up here in LA. That's where it started. So I mean, like cars made here, but the customization, the specialization in that. So that's why you have the hot rod scene all comes from Southern California. the lowrider scene, of course, Southern California, east of Los Angeles, really specifically the city of Maywood and
Wow.
Whittier Boulevard in Maywood is where kind of the whole lowrider started, spread throughout the world from there. You have again like the Cal style VWs where you take a VW and customize it with special wheels, luggage rack. That all originated here in Southern California, and then more recently you have like the sport compact JDM scene that sprung up here, the Fast and Furious types of cars that became big and of course became internationally known. It kind of it started more or less in Japan, but of course it came over and spread throughout the world, mainly
Yeah.
through Hollywood and through Los Angeles.
Which car represents LA?
Oh, that's a tough one. God, you can go anywhere with that. It's hard to say. I think it would have to be a convertible, no matter what, because this is one of the few places where you can really get away with enjoying a convertible, a lifestyle, and just because of the affluence, maybe a Porsche 911 Cabriolet,
Okay.
I think would work. Certainly, you'd have to say the Ferrari Californias, just because they have the name California in them. They were influenced by here. They're convertibles. They're fast. They're beautiful. But then you have, of course, the Shelby Cobra. I think is another
Yeah.
one where a car that originally came from England, but had Carroll Shelby drop the engine right in it. His place, of course, is right by LAX. That's actually another car that comes from LA, probably one of the better known ones. Even though he's from Texas, so it's not always thought of as an LA car, but
Yeah.
they were built there. A lot of them were built just outside of LAX, and again, a legendary vehicle. So one of those three, I think, would do
Okay.
it. But then you could go really anywhere. Again, we talked about the lowriders, the hot rods. I mean, those could all
Yeah.
represent LA really well.
I love that. All those different cars, like how do you get them into the Peterson? Do they like airlift them and bring them in there?
Well, the building itself is an old department store, and
What?
yeah, that's what it was built as back in the '60s. And I think it was called a Saibu back then, and then it became an Orbox, which was another large department store. But so that's basically it. It just has a normal garage, so and a freight elevator. So you could
Oh,
just simply
perfect.
drive it up the garage, drive it right into the building, or up the freight elevator, and that's it. So it's it's not as difficult as it might sound. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a building that's able to handle that type of thing.
I had no idea it was a department store before it was the Peterson.
Yeah, that's going way back. That's going back to the mid '80s, I think, when it was that. But that's how that was really originally made for.
Wow. What's like the most interesting car there or the most interesting fact with something that the Peterson holds?
Well, the most interesting car, there's a couple. I mean, certainly the Shaw's Bugatti, as it's called. It was a Bugatti 1939 Type 57C that was gifted from the government of France to the Shah of Iran for his wedding in 1939, and it's a one of a kind model. They
Wow.
made several of the actual model, but this is the only one with this particular body, and a stunningly beautiful car. A great history that it came out of the country of Iran to the U.S. And been here for many years now, fortunately, because a lot of those cars are still there in Iran. And again, one of a kind. You're not going to see it anywhere else.
Yeah.
You also have Steve McQueen's Jaguar, his XKSS that he bought, and it's one of only 16 made, so it's a very unusual car. And he lived, of course, right in this area, so he drove up and down these streets all the time in that car. And again, a beautiful vehicle. His own car, definitely connected to him. We also have, of course, the famous round door Rolls Royce. The museum has the famous round door Rolls Royce. It's a Rolls Royce Phantom 1 with a custom Belgian body on it that has the round doors on each side and an aerodynamic look. So it's a 1925 chassis with a 1934 body. So you have that kind of streamlined modern style that's on it. Outside of that, tons of great cars. I mean, all kinds of old movie cars and
Yeah.
celebrity-owned cars and one-of-a-kind type of vehicles. And yeah, cars you can't see anywhere else.
Before we close, I just want to talk. There was a really cool quote that I want to mention, and it talks about LA and cars and like architecture, because it's kind of the same thing, right? When you think about like the way that you build out your life and your lifestyle, especially as we just talked about California. And this quote is from our famous historian and architect named Alan Hess, and he says, "Modern architecture is about expressing new technology of the 20th century, steel, glass, concrete. But the automobile is probably the most important and most significant, most influential new technology of the 20th century to shape modern architecture, especially in Los Angeles. Architects are realizing you need a restaurant, you need a gas station, you need a showroom for selling cars. But what's the architectural potential in that function? That need developed here in Southern California simply because we had so many cars." which is so interesting, right? Because when you kind of brought those in, and what we just talked about is like you have to make space for everything and make it somewhat desirable for your lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, he spelled it out as to why what happened with cars and architecture and the whole thing here in LA. That lifestyle.
But again, I keep learning so much from you every single time that we chat. So
Great, yeah.
I'm so grateful for you. Thank you to everyone who listened. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and I'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Thanks very much.